What's going on, guys? It's your boy Anthony alongside the best Big 3 account in the universe, Big3 News, aka Will, back with another edition of The Fourth Man. And we're happy to welcome on Mike Botticello from the No Chill podcast today. I hope I didn't mispronunciate that, but how's it going? And we appreciate you coming on with such short notice.
A for effort. It was short notice. You guys were great. I know how that goes, and you gave me plenty of a heads up. So it's Botticello is the correct enunciation for all your Italian fans out there. Botticello is sort of how my family adopted it as Americans. My great grandfather immigrated with my grandfather from Italy, so it's all good. Whatever works for you.
That's perfect. I definitely understand the Italian last name thing, as my last name is Sigismond, used to be Sigismondo. Grandfather came over here, dropped the O, and the rest is history there. So I definitely feel that. Well, we appreciate you coming on today. Before we dive into it and jump into, your backstory and what you're doing, I want to take care of a little housework here. If you want to find the show on our social medias, it's at Fourth Man Pod, at Big3 News, and at @A_Siggy. And if you want to watch the show on YouTube, it's youtube.com/fourthmanpod. And for those of you listening on the Saturday afternoon on Dash Radio through the Nothing But Net channel, we appreciate you guys as always, whether you're a first-time listener or you're a regular listener. We always love to hear the feedback from everybody on Dash Radio. So now that we've got that taken care of, want to start with your career a little bit, just in general, kind of how you got started. You said your family kind of immigrated from Italy, but were you born out west in California in LA, or is that something that you later ventured out to as you kind of got your career going?
Yeah, well, my family immigrated. It was my great grandfather, so it was in the 40s. But I grew up in Connecticut actually. So that I immigrated to LA, and I wanted to work in sports media. So I had worked at ESPN there in Connecticut, and I said, if I really want to do this, I got to go into it, with both feet. And I wanted to be in a big market. Obviously, LA is, one of the biggest in the country. And I got in at Fox Sports. So I was there for 10 years, and I worked on my way up the ladder there, but also on all the studio shows. So NFL on Fox, MLB on Fox, NASCAR, UFC, and then FS1 launched. So it's Fox Sports 1. So that got it into more total sports, 24/7 sports. And I was a basketball guy, as you guys know. But sports, it's a calendar. So this time of year, obviously Super Bowl, NFL playoffs, and then things will focus on the NBA. And then this year's calendar is way different. But then, you have like the March Madness tournament, springtime turns to baseball. So you sort of just always roll with it. But my true love is basketball. So I got involved with more of the basketball content when they had it, and worked with guys, over Gary Payton was probably my favorite basketball guy to work with. Who else was there? Jim Jackson, guys that come through there were great. But yeah, so then I left in 2016, and my favorite thing to do to work with athletes like that, I think, is the best thing. And you get more from them when it's something that they want to do, and then there's something that they're invested in. So my background was as a producer. So then I was like, what can we do with them? Like, here's how it works. Here's what, they want to accomplish, and let's figure that out creatively. And I got connected to, you're probably gonna ask me this, so I'll just get there. I got connected to Gil through the Complex show Out of Bounds. So that was, we did a season of that, it was 2017, 18. And then after that season, we said, what else we can do? We were on hiatus, weren't sure if it was going to come back. So we did a podcast, No Chill podcast, as you guys know. And really, like, that just brought the best out of Gil, right? So his mind, his basketball intelligence, his perspective on players and the league and how things work, and just keeps it 100, with plenty of character and personality. So that's a bit of that backstory to bring it all to this.
Yeah, I love to hear that. I mean, it sounds like you went out there and you made it happen. You were able to connect with all these people. But I got to ask you initially about, meeting Gil. What was your first impression of him? What was his first impression of you? And, how was he about the idea when it came to podcasting? Like, was he all for it, or is it more something that he kind of grew into and now really seems to love?
Oh yeah, I mean the podcast was a little bit down the road. So when I first met him, yeah, I mean it was, uh, yeah, he was surprisingly just very easygoing and easy to work with. Like really, he was sort of new and working in the media space with the Complex show, and I was brought on to make it more sports centric. So I think he was welcome to that. But the real thing is he's a basketball guy. He doesn't really care about baseball or golf or whatever. He's an incredible athlete, which is interesting. But like he can pick up a baseball bat and hit a ball 400 feet, which is like, dude,
That's crazy.
Wish we that easy to everybody. And what we really honed in on was like his knowledge of the game is off the charts. So what else do you do with that? So that's really we focus on with the podcast. I mean, we have other people on, and I mean, best example was we had Ice Cube on, right? And that's a great story there. They had reached out, the Big Three had reached out about Gil. So do you guys know Justin Williams?
I'm personally not familiar with the name. Will might be.
Justin Williams, I don't know. Maybe is he with the Big Three? Maybe I'm not. It's not clicking with me.
Yeah, so big Three fans should definitely know who Justin Williams is. He's sort of the man behind the curtain that runs the whole show. So I believe his title is Director of Operations. But yeah, I mean, guy never sleeps, works, around the clock and brings things together and makes sure things come together on the, week to week basis during the season. So Justin and I actually worked together at Fox a long time ago, and then we got connected, and I was like, oh, we actually knew each other, right? And so that's how I got connected to the Big Three. So therefore, I had kind of an inside track. So he reached out to me a year later when we actually started the podcast about Gil. He's like, will Gil play? And I'm like, man, his knees just aren't right. That's why he actually had a short NBA career, like he had 4 knee surgeries in 2 years, and he would if his body held up. So then Thomas Scott, also a guy every Big Three fan should know, director of player personnel, lifer in the NBA. Obviously, his dad Byron, part of the Showtime Lakers, but he works, with players and on coaching staff. So that what brought him to the Big Three. So they said, "What if would you guys want Ice Cube on your podcast?" And I was like, "Yeah, hell yeah, obviously." So we were going to have him on, and part of what I do is I put together a rundown and notes and, research for what we're going to get into and put together like the topics and the theme of the show. And so I was all prepared for the Big Three, obviously, how he put it together, his vision for it, and then his love for basketball. I was the Laker fan and coming up in LA. And on that episode, he actually talked about, playing sports, when he was a kid. And then he just sort of brought it up. I don't know if you guys have the moment, but he brought it up on the show. It was like, it was like, so we're just kind of sitting there talking about it. And Gil's like, yeah, I'm just going to say yes. And I was like, have you even touched a basketball in a year? So it was in the moment, he was very enthused about it, but then it was a lot of work that he had to put in to get back to what he went to as a player, at a high level.
And so then what about, that was a question I was planning on asking, how staged or how, just instant was that moment of Cube asking him to come on the podcast? Was that something that maybe you're like, all right, we're going to break this news on the podcast, or if that was just, in the spur of the moment. So I think that's awesome to hear that
it was just very in the moment.
But what about,
so
I'm just
actually, if I remember it was the weekend, the week before All-Star Weekend. So the episode came out before All-Star Weekend. It was in Charlotte that year. And I landed in Charlotte and my phone was blowing up and it was like on ESPN and stuff like that or whatever. Like I saw it on TV. So totally not planned, totally on the spot.
That's so cool.
And he came in, Ice Cube came in with gear and like a whole, I was like, uh-oh, he actually he's ready to put on the full court press, if you will, half court press.
That's so cool. And that's like, I feel like the most Gilbert Arenas thing ever. And, you know, to touch sort of upon that, you know, so it was obviously a lot of hard work to get him to that playing point. But once he was actually playing in the Big Three, you know, what was his experience like in the league? What was that feedback that he was giving you? You know, was that, I don't want to say a regret, or was he like, oh, I'm so happy to be back? Or was he like, oh, maybe I should have like waited a year to give this a real go?
Actually, no. I mean, it was all positive. The crazy thing, and it was like I wish obviously people could have seen it, was we actually we documented the enemies, what they were going through in their preparation, and we had a partnership with More Sports in China, and we did a docu-follow series on the enemies, and they were actually working together as a team, training, and Gil was in great shape. I mean, he lost like all this weight, but he was just, and that helped him move better, right? And he was just competing, and they were actually playing. Do you guys know about the Rico Hines runs at UCLA?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they were going there, and they were working out with Rico as a team, but then also, you know, Harden was all those guys were playing in the summertime. It was like trying to remember, but it was like Harden and Pascal Siakam and a lot of young kids too, Kenny Martin Jr. and Cassius Stanley, and yeah, I mean, it was, they were all in that kind of shape to play with, you know, pros and young guys. So the thing for Gil, when he got to the season, he actually tore his meniscus in the fourth game. So when they were in Oklahoma City, that was like the last time he could really play. So he was playing on a torn meniscus for their last 3 games.
Jesus.
Wow.
So, I mean, that just sucks. So, and he had surgery September after the season.
Okay. Well, I don't even know if I was aware of that in the moment that Gil was playing on a torn meniscus. I know he was battling through injuries, but I don't know if it ever came out that it was a torn meniscus. So that's just, you know, crazy.
No, nobody ever talked about that. Yeah. No, he didn't. He just knew his knee was wrong, and he got it examined after the season, and he had surgery on it after the season.
Okay.
Wow.
Oh wow. Yeah. What you know, and then I guess from your perspective, you know, you're sort of in this, and then you get sort of, you know, as his partner, as the co-host of this podcast, he says yes to it in the moment. So then I guess you're like, okay, now we're, you know, gonna now do our schedule around the Big 3 season. What was that like, sort of following him as sort of this? I would say you had a very interesting role, right? Because you were definitely with Gilbert Arenas. You were definitely, I would absolutely say, part of the team, but you were also kind of like a media member, you know, following them with this docu-series that you said. You know, what was your experience like that summer?
It was nonstop actually. So I was doing another thing. I'll get to that in a second, but the experience was great, you know, because it was like, all right, we're gonna do this thing. We're gonna travel with the league, and they're very involved in, you know, every player gets some sort of input, and you know, obviously Gil was one of the bigger names. Lamar Odom initially up front, like that was really cool, and the attention around the team was really cool. But we were doing a podcast in each city, an episode in each city was the plan. So that was kind of part of the deal. And it was great exposure for the league too. So we'd have guys on like Lamar or Deshaun Stevenson or Mari Stoudemire while we were traveling, right? We got Antoine Jameson. That was actually the coolest one, was the first week in Charlotte, because we got Antoine Jameson and Brendan Haywood in Charlotte, because that's where they both live. Mm-hmm. So, and it was a Wizards reunion, which is pretty cool. And people drove from DC to Charlotte to see it, which is cool too. But another thing that was I did not expect was Gil's thing was, before a game when he was in the NBA, he had to be to the arena before anybody else. So he had to have the arena completely to himself. So let's say that the first team bus gets there at 4 p.m. He's got to be at the arena at 2 p.m. Wow. So no one can be on the court with him. He's like, it's secluded, and he gets through all his work and prep time. So he wanted, when we were there, me to arrange that at the Big 3 arenas. And the Big 3 is different because you had one game to the next game to the next game. So if you had the third game it kind of, like you had to wait for the other game to complete itself before it, but he would still go and get his shots up and get his feel for the arena and the lights, and the court earlier in the day. So I would have to go with him and, work him out. It was just me and him in the arena. And like even CBS would be setting up the cameras and people would still be filing in, but the Big Three didn't really expect that. No other player was doing that, so it was also like, well, he's got to go with his team. And I was like, no, you don't understand. He wants to be there before everybody, even if it's games later.
And you said too.
So that was cool. And then the other thing I was doing was they had the show all about the Big Three. So they wanted me to do a feature on a player called Back on My Block. Mm-hmm. Ice Cube loved the idea, and it was more attention to the players and the cities that they were in. It was about the concept. It was about the place that made them as a player and the people behind their stories. So it was really cool, and that was a great experience. So I was doing those as well. I'd usually fly in a day early and shoot them either a day before or stay a day later and do them after.
That's awesome.
So check those out. Those are really cool. So yeah, I mean, it was, like I said, it was nonstop. It was a great experience, a great summer. I was ready to do it again, obviously. But we'll see. We'll see what the next version of Big Three looks like.
Yeah, no, for sure. And one of the coolest things I think you guys did is you said you did a podcast in every city, but you guys did a podcast mid-game, which I think might be the first time anyone's ever even attempted that. I guess what's the story behind that?
It definitely was.
Yeah. Whose idea was that? Was the Big Three, like, did you have to get clearance through them? What was the story behind that?
Whose idea do you think it was?
I'm going to say it's Gil's idea.
Yeah, definitely Gil.
Yeah, 100%. I would have never thought, like, all right, you want me to do this while you're playing and interrupt your focus and your train of thought. So yeah, of course it was 100% his idea. And then I was like, I actually am not 100% sure this will work. But, he was used to, if the NBA was on ESPN or TNT or something, they would mic him up, right? So he was used to wearing a mic, but it's totally different. We had an IFB in his ear and in my ear, and he's got to be able to hear me and talk to me. And the funny thing was people thought he was talking to them. So in the game, like Mario Chalmers is guarding him and he's like saying like, oh yeah, he's not shit, no problem, don't worry about it. And Mario's like, who are you talking to? You're like talking to yourself? And then I, meanwhile, was like where their bench was, there's a seat at the end of the bench, like behind the, like diagonal to get last seat in the bench, right? And next to me, actually, Deshaun Stevenson was sitting there to watch and nobody knew what I was doing. So they're like, who are you talking to? And then like Gil would kind of look back at me sometimes and Deshaun's like, are you talking to Gil right now? And I'm like, yep, this is the podcast. And he's like, that's such a Gil thing to do. He's like, that's so dope. But yeah, nobody had probably ever done that or has done that since.
What was the feedback on that? I mean, like the reception on it. I mean, obviously that's a first time. I feel like that should have been made a bigger deal.
Yeah, I mean, we did get some attention for that. Like I forget who picked it up, but let's say like Bleacher Report or USA Today or something like that. So yeah, definitely. And to answer your question about what was the Big Three's reaction, they were like, "What are you doing? Like, what are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Oh, he's actually going to play and be mic'd up." So they were cool. Once they figured that out, they were like, this is really cool. Like, look what these guys are doing. Like, kind of, this is the whole point of it. Like, try things and like bring attention, to us and you and all that. But the funny thing was during a game in an arena, they play music so much, like timeouts, dead balls, like, so a lot of times we couldn't hear each other. It's like being in a club or something, it's just like the music's so loud and we couldn't hear each other. So there's a lot of things we had to cut, just for the sake of volume.
I'm sure the editing process was a very difficult one, but that's kind of what I love about the Big Three is that they're so open and willing to try things. It's really a player empowered league, and they really have a lot of input on the league. Going back to the Back to My Block sessions, I found that really intriguing when you were doing it. With Mike Taylor was one of them, but who do you feel like you learned the most about, or throughout that series?
Everybody had their own story, so that everyone was different in that sense. Yeah, Mike was a great one because obviously like he's so energetic and really just like he loves life, man. And he is doing so much there in Wisconsin. So, that's what it's all about. Where you're from, you got to give back as a player, because wherever the game takes you, that's who made you. So they're always going to be the most supportive of anyone or any place that you came from and wherever you go. So Mike was great. Carlos Arroyo was great. Like his whole world, but man, that guy has Miami on lock. He's a great life. So like he was just so cool. And Miami obviously is a great place and kind of a underappreciated basketball city, So
Yeah.
that opened my eyes a bit more about, just what's going on down there. It's not just all South Beach and parties, but it is pretty cool when you win championship with the Heat. Like, yeah, you get invited to some cool parties and life is good. So, Frank Nitti is another guy. Like, I think he's an incredible player first and foremost, but just an interesting guy and has so much to say and kind of all just well put together, well spoken. And so cool. And to go to the Drew League with him and see him, I think he put up like 40 the game that we were there too. He actually, I remember, I don't think he started well. I think he was like 3 for 12 or something like that. And he ended up with 40. And just like I had seen him play before. And he just really, obviously like exciting and super bouncy as a player. So fun to watch. But yeah, that was great.
That's so dope. I forgot that.
So many guys, like they all have great stories, man. They're
Well, I really forgot that Frank was playing in the Drew League and the Big 3 at the same time there, which is crazy to even think about now how he's transitioning and stuff. I also want to just go back a little bit because we were talking about we're excited to see how the Big 3 might be in comparison to how it used to be. This is something that Will and I have tried to figure out, speculate on. I mean, any type of Big 3 player involved in some kind of podcast or Ice Cube involved in any kind of radio show talking about the Big 3, any kind of information we can get. We're trying to figure out how it might play out. I just want to hear in your eyes, what do you feel like would be maybe the best thing for the Big 3 to do in this kind of environment? Or have you had any ideas of maybe how the Big 3 could work within everything going on?
You're talking about pandemic related?
Yeah. I mean, just with everything going on, we've seen obviously the NBA adjust and other leagues adjust as well.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when everything was early on in the pandemic, it was the idea of a house and a reality show and a bubble.
Yeah.
And for the Big 3, that's perfect because it's not a lot of guys on a team, not a lot of teams really compared to the NBA. So they could really pull that off. Mm-hmm. I just think it was early in the pandemic, which people didn't really know what was going to happen and what to expect. Obviously, the NBA put together their bubble, and you just think of how many teams and players, and that the fact that they were Disney World, obviously, would be one of the only ways to do it. So anything could happen, I think, in 2021. I'd love for it to be back full scale and they travel and all that. It probably makes the most sense to do a bubble sort of setup or a tournament kind of thing. And that's what I've heard at the moment would happen. I think you guys maybe some of the early speculation is that what it would be for this year. So, I mean, I'm a fan, so the show must go on. I think they got to figure it out one way or another. And I think, where there's a will, there's a way. But if, you want everybody to be safe and you want the guys that, want to play and are committed to it to be safe and be able to do it. And I've heard that like there's definitely still a good amount of interest and plenty of guys are ready for it.
Well, that's why
Hooper's gonna hoop whenever they can.
That's what I wanted to ask you too. Like you know the guys a lot better than we do, not just within enemies, but the league. Like, do you feel like a lot of people would be comfortable playing in a bubble environment?
Well, I think it would be a shorter schedule, so yes. That's not so bad. I mean, the NBA bubble was what, like 4 or 5 months?
Yeah, I remember
like that. It kind of felt like forever, but then it also flew by.
Yeah. Well, because I know like Joe played in a bubble once too. He played that TBT bubble, but I know some of these guys, like we've heard Dwayne Wade talk about how he wouldn't want to play in a bubble. And, some of these guys have played for so long, maybe they have other ventures they'd rather tend to than spend time in a bubble, waiting for the big three games every week.
Yeah. And so, but the thing about it is I feel like big three, because it is 3-on-3, it's half court. The recovery isn't the same, that, you know, the turnaround doesn't have to be so long if you're, you know, like usually it's 1 week apart between games. So, I mean, maybe they can get it done in 3 weeks, a whole season, including the championship. So that's cool. I mean, think of some sort of hybrid of like the NCAA tournament, right? That goes on for good part of a month, and then how the regular Big Three season is what, 12 weeks or so. So so that's 3 months. So maybe if you can, shorten that.
Like that idea.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting idea. That was one of the things I know we talked about. Like I said, if you want to make the season shorter, just instead of 1 game a week, you do, you know, multiple games a week. But also too, you know, I feel like it's just a balancing act between that. Like you said, the recovery time is good, but I feel like a lot of these guys, like you said, like if Gil, you know, hurts himself or a player hurts himself week 3, you know, it's much less of a time to even think about, am I going to play on this injury? And I'm not. And especially with depending on, you know, the age of some of these players, or, you know, what condition their knees or their ligaments or things like are in, it could have, you know, definitely an effect on some teams somewhere down the season. But do you get the sense that guys are sort of, you know, I'm willing to, whatever this looks like, you know, or to, you know, scheduling things like that, like I'm going to play for the big three? Or do you think we might see guys be like, you know, I'm going to take this summer off and then I'll be back next year? Or they're like, I'm only going to play if it's once a week or something like that?
I mean, I think to know the nature of a pro athlete, that as long as they have time to factor it into their life, because they got to prepare and they got to train and they got to get it in, you know, in the right headspace to where they're ready to compete and dedicate, you know, the schedule to it and the calendar to it. And a lot of guys, especially if they are a little bit older, they may have families and wife and kids, so they can't be away from their families. That was like the hardest thing about the bubble, right, for NBA players. So I think if you lay those things out, it's definitely doable. Injuries are going to happen, right? So like that's just part of sports. But I think it's funny, we're talking about a schedule, like that seems to be the most important thing. And it's so boring because it's a schedule, but you know, that is square one before you go anywhere. But I think then when guys know and it's go time, and they're signed, they know what they signed up for, they're all in. That's just the mindset that you have. Like nothing else really matters, you know?
Yeah. And I feel like we've been stuck on like that schedule part for so long because it is square one, you know, like we're ready to move on to step 2 and step 3, but like we don't really know where to go until we have like that initial plan in place. And that's really been the hardest part. I think the thing that I'm most looking forward to in the big 3 was the fact that they were about to have some rule changes within, you know, they were changing from basketball to a fireball 3 league. They had a few other rules in place that seemed really exciting, but I think one of the cool things was that they were going to try to allow other athletes to play and come to their own combine and see if they could then go to the big 3 combine and play. And one of those guys, I feel like that's been talked a lot in relation to the big 3 was Terrell Owens, T.O., who you guys actually had on your podcast recently. Was there ever any like inclination or conversation talking about the big 3, maybe even like off camera, like, you know, surrounding his interest, or if he still had that same interest?
Well, I mean, if you ask any player from another sport if they could play, say, basketball, of course they're going to say yes. That's the dream. So if you're an elite level athlete, yeah, I can go there and dominate too. Easier said than done. But T.O., yeah, I mean, physically, right? He's a physical freak. So yes, he would definitely be a guy that you throw his name into the ring, and you know he probably would be up for the challenge. I've known him for a few years now, actually, and I've known his background as a hooper. He can legit hoop. So it makes a lot of sense when you start to look around at guys from other sports that fit and whatever. Football players, in my opinion, generally aren't the best hoopers, mainly because they're just bulky, right? You got to have more muscle mass to absorb hits or give hits. So basketball, you just got to be more agile, more fluid. So, but I'd rather be probably a football player on a basketball court than a basketball player on a football field. You'll survive better on a basketball field, that transition. There's very few guys, right, that if you put them, like if you put them on a football field, that they would not get their head knocked off.
No doubt. I'm just so fascinated by T.O., I think, because, I went to the same college as T.O. did. And so I feel like being in sports journalism throughout my collegiate career, you hear a lot about T.O. and how great of a hooper he was. Obviously, we know what he can do on the football field. So that's one guy I feel like I'm always tied to, especially when it comes to other athletes that could potentially play in the Big 3. But, we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Want to talk about the No Chill podcast a little bit because of all the great guests you've had on. First off, congrats on 100 episodes. I know that's huge, and I thought that was a fun episode with Dwayne Wade there. But I want to ask, through 100 episodes, has there been a favorite episode of your podcast, or maybe even a favorite guest?
Oh man, I mean, there's a lot of highlights for the fact that you like them in different ways, right? So doing a podcast during a live game at the Big 3 is definitely a highlight. Being on the road, and like even Jason Richardson was in Miami, and hotels is very. We had a whole floor in this like lounge area, so we made it work in that environment. But and then I think having star basketball, like KD was really cool. He asked Gil to come on. It wasn't like we had to really even chase him.
Wow.
Obviously John Wall was great because there's been a few guys, John Wall, Caron Butler, Deshaun, Nick Young, obviously. So there's that Wizards reunion. Like that's always a fun thing. Nick, obviously that's a highlight too for different reasons. Nick was almost like that story there is like, you get those two together. I've been around those guys off camera enough to know what happens. But having them on, sit down at a table, like to give each other their full attention for an hour or so, which would turn into 2 hours. But I just knew to like throw whatever notes you have out the window, because they're just going to do what they do. So just bring that all together. So, that's another highlight. And obviously like people love those. And there's a lot of, I think the key to it, and my favorite part, is the range. So it's like, if we're talking to star players, young prospects, and Gil having his son Elijah on, I was like, this is very different, because that'll be something that they can both look back at, 20 years from now. And that his son is a hooper, by the way, great player for his age. So yeah, it's all of those things. And the point is, we're never bored. You get different things to try out and ideas in your head. All sort of fits the same format and structure in a lot of ways, but at the same token, you let it evolve.
How do you, as a professional, because this is really something that I'm interested in when I watch you guys, because I think it's just a fantastic podcast that you guys have. It's one of my personal favorites. But so let's say if it's a lounge, right, and it's you, Gilbert Arenas, and then another, basketball player, specifically like a Kevin Durant or Dwayne Wade. There's this sort of like unspoken brotherhood, or like experiences that only Gil and that player have, because they've had similar experiences. They've been in the league. So how do you, as a professional, prepare for? You're like, listen, like, I'm good. I know I'm good at my job. I'm going to come prepared, and like, I'm going to make sure that I'm absolutely like a factor in this conversation, and I'm going to, making, insightful questions and things like that, and get the most out of these two individuals. But I also know that like there's only things that Gil is going to relate to them, and there's only going to be experiences that they're going to be able to share and relate on. How do you prepare for that? How do you balance that as a professional?
I mean, really, my approach to it since day one has always been, I'm going to set the table, because really the function of it is, it's not a two-man show like Matt and Steven or Q and Darius. It's Gilbert Arenas. So my job really is to give him the lob, like serve him up and let him, whatever's in his head, bring that out. And also pick up things like, okay, you said this, let's follow up on that, or let's bring that out more. And I think when you're in that space of getting guys with that, background and that relationship, like him and D Wade have, man, pushing like 15, 20 years of time together. So it's like, you guys know each other better than I do. So you're going to let each other, tell each other stories and bring out the most of each other. So it's just recognizing on those things and keying on it, to where you're thinking, what would people want to hear? And what are they saying that is really interesting? There's a lot there. So keeping that thing, constant and fluid. And really what we do before is, in my mind, I research and read other interviews or watch interviews and, prep notes that way and pick themes. So if I say I could get an hour with Dwight Howard, what are we going to talk about? And I ask Gil those things. And a lot of times really how it works is I put together the topics and then we tackle those. But the theme is always, one specific thing that we could really just go on for an hour or two, almost like you can never stop talking about it. It's like there's so much to that theme.
That's awesome. So you're bringing the structure, or you're bringing the chill to the No Chill podcast, essentially.
Yeah, I don't know. Am I the chill guy? I guess so. I haven't heard that one yet. That's a good one.
Honestly, I was just...
And the structure is the fact that it's no, I like it. I'm gonna use that. No, the structure is like, it isn't a structure. It's there's a purpose to it. And like I said, a theme, but we're going to let this go where it goes. But we can't say that we don't plan it, because we for sure do. So.
Yeah, honestly, I was just throwing in something corny there. I feel like that's my thing on this show. So, but
I'm a fan of dad jokes, so I'm with you on it.
Oh, that could be a theme that Anthony talks about for about however long. Yeah. Just dad jokes and things like that.
Dad joke improv, just work it into the show. Have it be its own segment.
100%. Well, I guess really just want to cap it off here with, what are kind of some of your other ventures right now that you're doing outside of the No Chill podcast? And is there anything that you'd like to plug that maybe our listeners should know about and how they can find it?
No, I mean, I'm going to plug you guys. I think what you guys are doing, I wanted to give it a second on that. I mean, I think what you guys do are great for not only for the Big 3, but for the game of basketball and just fans out there to know that you can watch the game and be a fan of it and then speak on it. That's what I always used to watch basketball or watch sports in general. And in my mind, just like rank it and like who's doing what. And just, I don't know, like I have my own like website in my brain of what I'm into. And I think that's what it's all about, because, we all watch it for different reasons and different motivations, but then to do something like what you guys do, with the Fourth Man is just, it is that you're coming together as fans to examine something that you're passionate about and something that you love. So that's what I'm going to plug. I'm going to plug that. And, No Chill, thank you guys for the support there. And keep an eye on me for other projects that I got coming together. But yeah, the stuff like seeing you guys do this, I've been following for a while. I know it's people need to know it's not that easy. It's a lot of work and juggling and, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make it happen that you guys need to get some credit for. So props to you guys.
Well, we appreciate that.
Yeah, I 100% appreciate that. I mean, I didn't expect you to say that. So that means a lot, especially coming from someone of your background and success. That really does mean a lot. And I thank you for that.
I think it's easy too for us, with the Big 3. I mean, it's a league that we love. It's a league that we want to see grow. And this is our way of hoping to, help it succeed in some kind of fashion or keep it relevant. But I think also too, I think we come from the understanding, like, we know that these guys are the experts. We're not here to necessarily like analyze or critique as if we're like these other professional basketball players. We come with more of the mindset, like, this is what we saw, this is what we watched, this is what we think could be better, but we're not here to necessarily like try to be like any kind of experts like we see nowadays. I feel like everyone's kind of an armchair expert in some capacity in the basketball world, which is fine to an extent. Obviously, it's also a content thing, but for us, it's all about just hoping to see the Big 3 grow and showing people like, hey, these guys, it's one, not a league full of retired people. This is a league of very talented basketball players that some of them you might not be able to even see, and it's something you should check out. So That all being said, that's one long-winded answer for we appreciate that, especially like Will said, coming from your background.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. I mean, a part of my motivation is like I still play. This year has been tough. There hasn't been gyms, but like, you know, I'd be up generally like 5:30 in the morning to go and getting in a morning run before I go to work. But also just the guys that I have played with over the years, it was sort of that unspoken thing to where we get up in the morning, we'd run fives, you know, and people were like, "Why do you do it?" It's like, man, because I love the game, and I'm never gonna not play basketball. I wish I played in the NBA, but I knew I got to a certain point where I was like, all right, the NBA is not in the cards for me. I'm going to pursue, like, what else am I into on it? Well, I still love the game and I love sports. So I'll look at media and like where I can find my niche in my lane. And that's sort of been the motivation all along. But I've never stopped playing. So in fact, during the pandemic, I bought a hoop so I could just get shots up, you know, outside by myself. So so I mean, that's it. Just keep loving it, keep doing it. And if there's a message for people, do what you love. And that's exactly what you guys are doing.
For sure. No,
100%.
definitely. What do they say in Uncle Drew? They're like, you don't stop playing because you get old because you stop playing, right? Is that what they say? Yeah.
I think C Webb said that in the movie.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I also too, I wanted to end with this as well. This is at least my final question. You know, last offseason, we were sort of getting ready and we were, you know, believed there's going to be a 2020 season. We sort of, you know, we went out on a limb and we were ready to make asses of ourselves, where we basically were under the impression when we were making rosters and doing power rankings that Nick Young was going to be on enemies. You know, when we were like, Nick Young's going to be on enemies. So if you can tell us right now, if that's not your liberty to sell, you don't have to, but you know, was Swaggy P going to be rocking an enemies jersey?
Ooh, well, if Swaggy P rocked an enemies jersey, it'd have to have some sort of fashion twist to it or like alternate color from black and white. I don't know if you guys seen the news. He's playing in China.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So he is doing that. I actually know that he really did like the construct of the Big Three. So I'll leave that as a hint.
Okay.
I also know that I'll give you another hint. Coach Arenas would like him on his team. So
okay. Okay. That's very interesting.
Love that hint.
These are all things for the future. Who knows? But they're just, you know, crystal ball kind of things. But yeah, I mean, look, Nick can hoop anywhere and get buckets anytime. So I think he'd do very well in the league. I think he has a lot more basketball left in the tank, and he'll do well in China because it's about volume scoring over there. And you know, where he goes after that, we shall see. Stay tuned.
Well,
that's going to be one hell of a dynamic.
I was going to say
Coach Gilbert Arenas, player Nick Young.
Well, and also too, we're still waiting for like that.
That's a show in itself. That's another like a whole.
Well, I was just like, you know, we're still waiting for that guy who's like the 4-point king. I don't think we've seen enough guys like want to go out on that limb and just start taking a bunch of 4-point shots. But I think if there was anyone to do it, it would be Swaggy P, Nick Young. So.
Do you guys know the stats? Is Joe Johnson, is Mike Bibby's the all-time leader, right?
Yes.
Yes. Mike Bibby's the all-time leader. Yeah.
Did Joe have the most in a season though?
I think Mike had the most in a season, and that's what's making him the all-time leader. I just think that Joe Johnson is definitely the leader in like game-winning, like contested 4-point shots. So I think he gets a little bit of a boost. Yeah. I think he gets a little bit of a boost in everybody's minds because we're like, oh my God, like he must make this every day. But really, like it's Mike Bibby. And I'm pretty sure, I'm trying to think who it was. I think like Silas or even like Mike Taylor isn't too far behind him.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Deshaun Stevenson would be another one.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know he's getting the attempts up there. I don't know how many he's made, but he's another guy that fits the league very well. He's a great dude too, by the way.
No doubt. And, you know, hopefully we could see all those guys playing in the Big Three in some sort of capacity in 21. But Coach Arenas, we'll be sure to keep that in mind. Nonetheless, we appreciate you coming on, dropping a little bit of Big Three knowledge and sharing some of your stories. really looking forward to what you guys do with the No Chill podcast. And, honestly, this was fun for us. So we hope we can do this again.
Thank you guys. Anytime. And I'm big fans of yours too. So keep doing what you do.
Appreciate that.